Hi, I'm Trevor Davis with Counteraction. As the theme of today's session is about international state disinformation funded disinformation campaigns, I find it sort of curious that most of the solutions that I've seen out there are confined within the borders of impacted countries. And I'm concerned that that slows the development of consensus on proportional response that underlies the effective deterrence. My question, which I guess I'll direct to Lisa Maria, is could you explain what the role of East Stratcom is, what the failures have been, and how that relates to individual countries' efforts in the EU, and what lessons does that have for the rest of us?
Okay, so I am not fully an expert on EU regulation specifically, but generally EU regulation, as all regulation, is incredibly slow. And as you mentioned, it's very difficult to actually get a moving consensus. And I think the EU and then specifically also the Stratcom efforts have been more about transparency, about civil engagement than they have been about regulation. So I think it was more about educating citizens. I think it was more about debunking specific pieces of disinformation and shedding light on specific campaigns. That being said, I think they have already done a lot of the work in the countries where those sort of playbooks were really groomed for the first time. So for example, when we're looking at Estonia, when we're looking at the Ukraine, those sort of playbooks were being groomed for a really long time. There already were several strategies to sort of counter them, especially on a media literacy level. But I think the topic only then got the attention that it deserved after the 2016 elections. And I think, yes, you're right in your observation that this sort of knowledge transfer happened really slowly, or maybe did not happen at all. I think specifically also on an EU level, there were a lot of different projects. There were a lot of different regulation efforts that were not coordinated in many ways. And I think that is also one of the big to-dos, is thinking about, okay, can we actually have some sort of government agency or even some sort of body where we can come together and have that knowledge transfer, where we come together and have some sort of best practices shared, have some sort of potential monitoring in a way that is not only individual actors.
Hey, Chair. I would just the only add on to that I would say is that, again, we're trying to get folks, and what I think your question is a very good question, is to move outside of what I think country-based models to language-based models. So we have to think about these as language markets, not country. So it's not I think of this idea of that the older models like beaming in and out of a country. And so if you think about language and you show the map on that, which is something we're doing now for our kind of data-driven approach to reaching new audiences, it's really, I think it's about sort of languages, and right, because if you think about top 3 languages that people speak, so like a language like Farsi, actually, there's hotspots all over the world, right, in the Middle East and Southeast Asia and other places in terms of a top 3 language that people speak. So I think that also gets us out of that conundrum.
Do you mind if I respond a little bit? This is good. So from the government's perspective, that resonates, that question, a bit with me. I mean, I think you view misinformation operations as one component of a number of ways a hostile state might try to interfere with your domestic affairs. And so once you categorize it as a national security threat, then the government should be thinking about what tools we bring to bear to, as you put it, deter. And so they could be diplomatic, or it could be counter-messaging, although I don't know that it does so much for deterrence. It could be sanctions. So I agree with you that from the government's perspective, while we're less involved, I think, in the content space, we should be thinking about it as a national security threat, and that should be elevating it to sort of state versus state problem. And we should look at it that way, and we do.
Any other questions? Next question.
Thank you, Dwight. Thanks for organizing just a really wonderfully diverse kickoff to the proceedings.
Thanks.
Today and tomorrow.
You work so hard.
I appreciated Adam Hickey's comment, the historical perspective on misinformation and disinformation. And I think it's important to avoid making statements about the recent events on social media and the internet as being something new. This has been around for a long time. It preceded social media and the internet, and it's really important to avoid making that. If we're going to be factual, we need to stick to that historical perspective. It seems that the solutions that we're talking about, everything that this conference is organized around, is a defensive posture to the propaganda efforts of whatever agency we're talking about, be it Russia or otherwise. I'd be curious to get some feedback as to how, whether we ought to also embark on kind of an offensive approach. The truth needs to be pushed out there as well. We need campaigns that advocate the values and the facts that we have at hand. So I'd open that up to the board.
Well, I disagree. I think that that's what we're doing. We're actually out there, 4,000 plus people a day, churning out, hundreds of hours of TV broadcast, radio, and digital content in 58 languages, reaching about 290 million people. So, we want to continue to double down on those resources to sort of get to, we're adding languages. We're becoming more data driven in terms of how we think about audiences, but I don't think that's defensive at all. And I also, and I know what you're getting at, because when you say campaigns, it's really interesting. I think this is where the lines blur a little bit. Campaigns is like what I think of, and I come from that area too. I used to work I lived in South Asia and Islamabad and Kabul and in the Northwest Frontier provinces for years. When we say campaigns, I think we think messaging. Like we have a message and boom, it's like we want to send it out to people. But in this decentralized information environment, messaging doesn't work the same way, right? So when you think about, so what we've done is we've thought about content sort of a little bit like swarm theory. So you think about enabling all of our journalists to become sort of independent purveyors of this information, right? As they build their own networks. That's more authentic and sort of ground up than sort of like, as I oftentimes say, look, the best messaging doesn't come from DC. It doesn't come from my office, all right? It comes from the field, right? And the field is out where in those language markets working with local NGOs, journalists, and others to help build their ecosystem. So a short way of saying, I think we're doing it. We're proactive about it. We are doing stuff that I think when we think about adding new countries, we're actually looking at smaller languages where on the sort of like, if I take Polygraph, it's not just to respond to what happened on the Kremlin disinformation campaign, but we want to get ahead of that curve, right? Because we want people to give them the tools so that they can assess information for themselves.
I also want to add on that. I want to add on the first part where you said that propaganda is also always very much a reflection of history and is still very much the same. And I don't quite agree on that point. So I do think, yes, propaganda is something that we have had for a very long time. There's actually, it dates back apparently to Alexander the Great, who is often credited with the invention of propaganda. And I think many of those basic techniques of appealing to emotion are still in place. But with social media, it's not just the evolution, the logical one of the next medium, like it was from newspaper to TV, but it's a lot more to it that comes with it. And that is because it comes with automation, it comes with big data, it comes with the possibility to target people, and it also comes with the possibility to user-generate propaganda. And so social media has really democratized propaganda. It's not something anymore that is incredibly expensive and that is only in the hands of nation states that put a lot of money into it or any sort of corporate actors, but it's really something that is quite accessible, and you can have a very sophisticated campaign that is very targeted, where you have a lot of data points and really custom tailor something to someone without having it associated with the sort of costs that you would have if you wanted to do a propaganda campaign to reach 40 million people 10 or 15 years ago.
Sorry. Good morning. Thank you for organizing this panel. My name is Adi. I'm with Storyful. This question is to Ms. DeResta and to, Dr. Rula. I would like to hear your opinion on this. We compared it, or you compared it to this disinformation campaigns to sort of part of or compared to cyber warfare. And in line of this, I want to ask, have you encountered or do you see campaigns that targeting not political discussion or those kind of things, but more of economic interest? For example, the energy sector, preventing development of energy sector or promoting something for the sake of a country interests, another country, a foreign country interests.
So, am I on? Sorry. We have seen energy industry, anti-fracking bots is a common one, probably the most common one. Its attribution is, of course, very difficult, especially when you're on the outside looking. We don't have access to the metadata behind the account creations, the device IDs, so on and so forth. What we do see is throughout the presidential campaign, posts about fracking appearing on candidate homepages. So things that you would not necessarily think of as a Republican position, but basically arguing vehemently against fracking, saying Hillary Clinton is for fracking, therefore we have to be against it. And so putting kind of a political spin on that and these comments would be posted verbatim over and over and over and over again. And that's the kind of thing you only get when you kind of look en masse, but we have no attribution there. The only thing we can say is, given that the IRA was active on those pages, it is not inconceivable to think that that would have been one of the things that they went after. Similarly, we see this with relation to GMOs also, areas where we believe that there's sort of a strategic industry interest. So creating concern about GMOs, creating concern about fracking to push people back towards oil, we see those types of narratives. We believe that also there's the potential to do things that manipulate stock prices, that target companies directly. We're seeing right now this is not Russia at all, but are y'all familiar with the Cemex issue that's happening right now? The QAnon taking on Cemex? Okay. So that's another example of how easy it is for a corporation to get sucked into these sorts of campaigns and not really have any recourse to do anything about it.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Renee said. Simple answer is yes. I mean, we see, for example, in the Farsi language market, during the height of the protests, the IRGC and Revolutionary Guard was really focused on because of the vast sort of conglomerates that are associated with, in terms of the pharmaceutical industry and others, to putting out information, right, in terms of both potential partners of theirs, but are trying to keep secured some of the contracts that they had, with the opening of sort of trade. You find a lot in like the Turkish language market right now in terms of again, conglomerates, sort of business conglomerates. You had it around the press media consolidation recently, but you also have key areas, right, in terms of oil and gas that they're putting out. So yes, I think as Renee said, you're finding a lot more of this. And I think the part she mentioned, that the manipulation of it, I think is going to be very interesting in terms of when you think about domestic stock markets and in terms of FDI investments. That's where I think it's going to be particularly, apart from all the copyright, and we've talked a lot about that in terms of intellectual property.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Hi, Derek Johnson, FCW, over here. Over here. Hi. So this question is primarily directed for Adam, but if anyone else wants to take a crack at it, be my guest. You had talked about the government using transparency to sort of expose and mitigate some of these campaigns. But as we know, these campaigns and operations by design latch on to previously existing political schisms within the American political ecosystem, right? So, fracking and GMO are issues that existed sort of before these campaigns went into effect. So how do you combat and expose these campaigns without inadvertently delegitimizing some of these underlying political debates? And as an example, you see efforts in the outside of government, like the Hamilton 68 dashboard, which have come under some criticism for painting with too broad of a brush what may or may not be a Russian troll-backed campaign. So, how do you wade through that debate, and sort of how do you kind of thread that needle, so to speak?
Yeah, you've hit on a very sensitive point. I mean, I think that's why I'm trying to signal that most of the time We are not, I would try. How about this? Ah, success. Yeah, I don't mean to suggest the government is likely or largely or frequently going to be weighing in on the truth of a particular argument or the like. In fact, for the reasons I gave in my remarks, there are a lot of reasons why we might not do that. And one of the principal reasons is avoiding even the appearance of partiality. So if you're talking about misinformation in the context of an election, that's going to be a situation where we're going to be particularly cautious. On the other hand, if you're talking about misinformation that is essentially lying about the government itself, so false information about where to vote, when to vote, how to vote, that is something we may have a more, it's different from the narrative you've described, and it's something where we have more of a, or a state government or local government might have a higher interest in weighing in on what is false and what is not. So I think you've hit on a real sensitivity, and that's why I don't think it's going to be us a lot of the time saying, what is right or wrong, though we have a role in saying, hey, provider, I don't know if you know this or not, but this network of pages here is connected, and here's some information about who might be behind them, and it's not necessarily folks who live here. So that, I think, is more likely to be the space in which we play. That makes sense.
Okay, we have time for one more question. One more.
Hello. So my question is for Harun, Lisa Marie, Renee. I'm curious about the extent to which you try to bring people on the right or on the far right, the conservative, into the discussion on fighting misinformation. I tend to observe that it seems to be often a left-oriented issue. And I'm really curious what your experience has been, if that's something you've tried to do, what are the kind of folks that you engage with. So if you can comment on that, that would be really helpful.
Could you also please identify yourself?
Sure. My name is Gleb Tsipursky. I'm with the Pro-Truth Pledge.
So one of the things that we talk about a lot at New Knowledge is this is not a partisan issue. And as we saw with the IRA in particular, the right and the left were targeted. We don't see that, we don't believe that turning this into a partisan issue benefits anyone. Specifics, I mean, I have been to a number of events where, you know, particularly one on memetics, where there were some kind of alt-right, you know, pro-Trump, let's say, supporters who were in the room discussing what they saw, memetic tactics. NATO was kind of studying memes for a while. At Stratcom, this came up in the context of that. So there is input. I think a lot of people do unify around the acknowledgement that the Russia influence campaign happened. And those who can start at that, you know, from that shared basis in fact, can actually work together to come up with a solution.
Yeah, so to clarify our role a little bit and how our project is looking into that, we are mainly concerned with providing the research and not so much actually have a specific agenda or have a specific civil engagement strategy that we're pursuing as well. But I think one of the policies that we sort of have is we want to help different people in the industry, whether it's regulators, whether it's social media companies, whether it's journalists, to have the knowledge to ask the right questions. And so I think in how we're trying to provide that knowledge is very much in a research style, a matter which is factual and which is neutral.
I'll add one more thing really quickly. I hope no one gets mad at me for saying this. In San Francisco on September 22nd, Data for Democracy is co-sponsoring an event with Lincoln Labs, which is a Republican-leaning tech organization, where we're bringing a bunch of folks out from DC and having a conversation about quantifying harms, regulation, so on and so forth. And it's all the panels are extremely bipartisan, and I would encourage anyone who wants to hear the right-wing perspective who happens to be in SF to join us on that day.
All right, and with that, we are going to break. So please join me in thanking all of our first lightning speakers. Those were terrific. We're going to break for 10 minutes, 10 minutes for coffee. We're going to reconvene at 11:05. Thank you.